What if you could tell Claude to build your website, push the code directly to GitHub, deploy it to Vercel, and then come back later and tell Claude to update the project without manually uploading files every time? That's exactly what I'm going to show you in this video. And the interesting part is that we are not just going to build a website with AI. We are going to set up a proper development workflow around AI. Claude will work on the code. GitHub will store and track the project. Vercel will handle the deployment. And whenever we make changes, the updated code can move through that same workflow and become a new development. So by the end of this video, you will understand how to set up this entire environment for yourself. I am Popmati Samson, the founder of ShakeWorld. Let's get started. Before we start installing anything, I want you to understand what you are actually building. The workflow is very simple. You describe what you want to build. Claude works on the code. The project is stored in GitHub. Vercel connects to that GitHub repository. When new code is pushed to the repository, Vercel can automatically build and deploy it. So instead of constantly downloading files, copying code, uploading folders, and replacing old versions, you have a development pipeline. And this becomes even more useful when you start updating the project. You can tell Claude to change this section, add this feature, fix this problem, redesign this page. Claude work on the existing project. You test the changes, and the updated code can be committed and pushed to GitHub. Vercel then takes that new version and deploy it. That is the workflow we are setting up in this video. Now there's something I want you to understand before we touch GitHub or Vercel. The quality of what Claude builds depends heavily on how you communicate with it and how you structure the project. When I first started using Claude to build projects, my prompts were very simple. I would say something like, "Hey Claude, can you build me an e-commerce website or build a logistic website?" And I would expect the AI to somehow figure out everything. But that's not really how you should approach serious project. Before you ask AI to build, there are two important stages: the discussion and the planning stage. The first stage is discussion. Instead of immediately saying, "Build this website for me," start by explaining what you actually want to build. Tell Claude what the product is, who the target users are, what problem you are solving, what the main features should be, how the business will operate, what you already know and what you don't know. And if necessary, give Claude real-world example of product or website you want it to study for inspiration. You can even use AI to research the idea before you start building. The goal at this stage isn't to generate code. The goal is to make sure Claude understands the project. Think of it like working with a developer. You wouldn't walk into a developer's office and simply say, "Build me something." You would explain what you are trying to achieve. AI should be treated the same way. I also have some of the prompts I've used for my own project. I will leave those resources in the description. You can study the approach and adapt it to your own project. Once Claude understands what you are building, the next step is planning. This is where you become more specific. We will decide how the project is going to be built. For example, what programming language are we using? What framework? What database? What authentication system? What APIs? What hosting platform? What folder structure? What major features? What should be built first? This is also where you establish the technical stack. For example, you might choose JavaScript or TypeScript with Next.js, or PHP with Laravel, or another stack depending on the project. The important thing is that you are making those decisions deliberately instead of allowing the AI to randomly choose technologies halfway through the project. So the process becomes discuss, plan, build, test, deploy, and improve. And that's the workflow I want you to take away from this video. Now you might be thinking, Pop Marty, if Claude is writing the code, do I really need to know programming? Here is my answer. You don't need to be an expert programmer to start building with AI, but you should understand the basics of what you are asking the AI to build. You should know the difference between a programming language, a framework, a database, and a hosting platform. You should understand enough of the technology stack to know what you are building. And most importantly, you should be able to recognize when something is working and communicate the problem back to the AI. For example, if you understand that your application uses JavaScript, Nest.js, and a database, you are in a much better position to understand Claude's explanation and troubleshoot problems. AI can help you write the code, but understanding the systems make you much better at directing the AI. Now that we understand the workflow, let's actually set it up. To properly achieve this, we are going to use Claude Desktop, GitHub, and Vercel. If you don't have Claude Desktop installed, you can download it from this link and install it on your system. Then create your GitHub and Vercel account. You can get the links on the description. Let's get started with GitHub. If you've never used GitHub before, then think of it as the place where your project source code lives and where you can keep a history of the changes made to that project. We are going to create a repository for our project. I will give the repository a name, choose the appropriate visibility, and create it. Now we have a home for the project, but there's one more important step. We need to allow our development environment to push changes to this repository. This is where we are going to use a GitHub fine-grained personal access token. And pay attention here because this is an important security concept. We are not going to give unrestricted access to your entire GitHub account. Instead, we will create a fine-grained token and limit its access to the repository we are working with. We will select the specific repository and give it only the permission it needs to work with the project. For this workflow, the important repository permission is the ability to read and write the repository content. Once we are done, you will see the access token code. You are going to copy it because that's the token that gives Claude access to the project repository. Note, once you are done building the project, make sure to revoke the access token because if you give it to Claude, you have exposed it to the public, which is not safe. So I highly recommend revoking it immediately when you are done with the project. Never paste your token into your source code, never commit it to GitHub, and never expose it publicly. Once this is configured, Claude can now work with the Git repository through the development environment. Now let's move to Vercel. Vercel is going to handle the deployment side of this workflow. We will create our Vercel account and connect it to GitHub. Then we will import the repository we just created. Vercel will detect the project and allow us to configure things like the framework, build settings, and environment variables. Once everything is configured, we deploy the project. Now our GitHub repository and Vercel project are connected, and this is where the workflow becomes really interesting. When we push new code to the connected repository, Vercel can automatically create a new deployment, so we don't have to manually upload and update the project every time. Now we are ready to bring Claude into the workflow. I will open Claude and give it the project instructions. Remember the discussion and planning process we talked about earlier. This is where it becomes useful. Claude already knows what we are building and what technology stack we are using. Now it can work directly inside the development environment. I will ask Claude to build the first version of the project. Claude will create the files, we will inspect the project, we will run it locally, and if we find problems, we will ask Claude to fix them. We are not just accepting whatever the AI produces, we are testing the application as we build it. Once we are happy with the current version, we can commit the changes. To push the project to the GitHub repository, you have to copy the project URL from the GitHub and also the access token we created earlier, and then tell Claude to push the code to the GitHub repository. Claude can now work with the Git repository and push the changes to GitHub, assuming the repository authentication and permissions have been configured correctly. Now let's open GitHub, and there it is. The code is inside our repository. We now have a proper version of our project stored in Git. Now let's go back to Vercel, because the GitHub repository is connected to our Vercel project. The new push can trigger a deployment automatically. Vercel pulls the latest commit, it builds the application, and if the build succeeds, we get a live deployment. And there it is, our application is live. But building the first version isn't the impressive part. The real advantage is what happens next. Let's say I want to change the home page. Instead of opening GitHub, downloading the project, say I want you to change the homepage hero section, keep the existing design system, and don't modify anything unrelated to this feature. Claude can inspect the existing project, make the changes and test them. Then we can commit and push the updated code. GitHub received the new version, Vercel tests the new commit, and Vercel creates the new deployment. That's the workflow, and you can repeat that process as the project grows. Once the project is working on Vercel, you can connect your own domain. For example, instead of using the default Vercel URL, you can connect a domain you own and make that your production website. We will add the domain inside Vercel, configure the required DNS record with the domain provider, and then I am not going to go in full details about buying a custom domain and setup. That will be in my upcoming videos, but you can get affordable domain in Namecheap. Use the link below to get a 65% discount. So the final system looks like this. Claude built and modified the project. Git tracks the changes. GitHub stores the source code. Vercel built and deployed the project. Your domain makes the application available to your users. Vercel isn't the only option. You can use another hosting environment depending on the type of project you are building. For example, if you have a Hostinger VPS, you can build your own deployment workflow around your server. But for this tutorial, I am using Vercel because it makes the Git-based deployment workflow extremely simple. So that's the setup. The important thing isn't just that Claude can write code. The real advantage is connecting AI to a proper development workflow. You discuss the project, you plan the architecture, Claude builds, Git tracks your change, GitHub stores your project, Vercel deploys it. And when you want to improve the project, you go back to Claude, make the change, push the new version, and deploy again. Once you understand this workflow, AI coding becomes much more than copying and pasting code from a chatbot. You are actually building and maintaining a software project. In the next video, I will go deeper into how to use Claude to actually build the project, how to write better development prompts, how to debug AI generated code, and how to keep a growing project organized without turning the code base into a mess. If you found this useful, subscribe to ShareCode because we are going to build some real project together.